that side.
Yeah, I could.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it only lasts for so long, it's back to normal. Then it needs to be refreshed.
Let's wait for them.
We're almost there, we'll just wait for Dan here.
Complain about teenage boys.
Yeah.
Did you get them? They were great, younger, but now that they're 14, boys are a pain. You should be grateful you're not having any girls. I guess I should.
We'll call the meeting back to order. Thank you again we were running ahead of time, so Joe's kind of started to explain to us the past versus how we're investing now.
And I am Julie Feldman, I'm the financial manager for the Board of Investments. So thank you for inviting us over here. And Joe left it where I was going to talk a little about some of our process that we really took our fiduciary duty very strong and wanted to ensure our participants that your market value of your participants' balances before transition was your market value after transition. And so there were numerous steps that we took along this line, and I'm only going to address a couple, but I can go into more detail if you want me to. The Board of Investments annually has an internal control review performed by external auditors. So we continue with that, external auditors doing our internal control review. However, we also increased our level of scrutiny this year on the Board of Investments. We actually had a SOC 1 Type 1 audit report performed on the Board of Investments. This was done in May, in addition to our annual control review. A SOC 1 Type 1 report is commonly referred to as a SAS 70 report. But the purpose of this report was really to provide our participants some degree of assurance that our balances and our reconciliations and our processes for recording all of this information before transition and after transition were correct and good. And so this is actually directly out of the SOC 1 report that the Board of Investments had an external auditor, and this audit report was to provide an independent review of the transition of the 5 pension pools combined into a single investment pool. The purpose of the review was to provide a professional, independent, and expert assessment of the board's internal controls as they pertain to this transition, as an independent assessment of the assignment of pension assets and ownership of each respective pension system before and after the transition. Also, an assessment of the adequacies of changes of workflow was conducted, both to review internal controls and operational procedures after the transition. The auditor found that in all material respects, based on the criteria described in the board's assertion in the report, that 1, the description fairly presented the conversion to the Consolidated Asset Pension Pool Monitoring and Reconciliation System that was designed and implemented as of May 5th, 2017, and 2, the controls related to control objectives stated in the description were suitably designed to provide reasonable assurance that the control objectives would be achieved if the controls operated effectively as of May 5th, 2017. We did provide a copy of this SOC report to both teachers, retirement system, as well as Impera. And the SOC 1 report is a report on the controls and the service organization. And we, the Board of Investments, are providing services on your behalf here at teachers, which are relevant to the user's entities' control over financial reporting. So we wanted to provide some assurance that the controls that we have in place were designed appropriately, were acting appropriately, there was no material problems determined, and that it could provide some assurance to your financial reporting and reporting years. So that was one of the big things that we did. I think we're one of the only state agencies, the legislative auditors shared with us, we are the only state agency that's ever done a SOC report here in the state of Montana. We did have to have conversations and discussions with the legislative auditor to get permission to do the SOC reports. So. And I can go into further details or anything that you want, but that kind of just summarizes it at a very high level.
I have a question that may be a little bit unrelated. The income or revenue distributions that we're getting out of the CAPP, it used to come monthly and now it's coming annually, causing a little bit of accounting confusion internally. Is there any reason we couldn't go back to monthly, or what was the purpose that it went to annual?
So I was going to get to that in a few minutes. So again, a great kind of lead in. But maybe let me answer that question. But before so, I didn't want you to take away, you know, when I was saying we make this change, it wasn't an overnight decision, right? And it wasn't just the investment team within the Board of Investment saying, hey, let's do this. It was a pretty extensive process, several months. You know, Julie and her team, you know, David, you are the executive director, people we work with externally, investment consultants, a custodial bank. So significant conversations and planning went into even considering the idea. And then we kind of said, well, how would we implement it and what do we want to do? And so with the auditors and the reports that we've had done, those for us were necessary and important, right, to do as part of the implementation. Now, to get to the income, right, we realized that there would likely be some downstream impacts, right, whether it came to the annual financial statements, either ours or yours, and so we knew there would be those issues to work through. So back to my original comment about investment income, right? Again, we think about total return and income as part of that, and historically we had distributed the income out of each of the pools that invested in it. But the process was, well, what pools got what income, let's automatically send it out. So again, thinking that like your checking account, and you just say, well, on the first of each month, just send me a check out with whatever interest the checking account got, right? And that helped reduce kind of the need of benefit payments, so that was liquidity, but it was inefficient, right? Because then think from a personal standpoint, you're like, well, why do I need this $20 check they just sent me? I gotta go back to the bank and deposit it again, right? And so we were getting income from all these different pools, but in some cases we didn't want money to come out of those pools. You know, so for example, say if money came out of the fixed income pool because of interest payments were made during that month and we send it out, we might say, well, now that lowered us from what range we want to have in fixed income, let's now put money back in. That was inefficient, right? So although we're measuring the amount of income over an annual basis that helps make up this total return of performance, we're not automatically distributing it. You can think of it being reinvested in the CAPP on an ongoing basis. So we're measuring that. We know how much was kind of income, but how we're funding benefit payments is we're saying, hey, we don't want to decide to sell these asset classes based upon how much interest they had. We want to sell the asset classes based upon their actual weighting today versus their target. So say if equities continues to do well, as they have in the recent past, instead of taking money from fixed income to help provide the net cash need, we're taking it all from equities. So it's part of a rebalancing approach, whereas historically, we sent it out from fixed income, then we took money out of equities and put it into fixed income. Now we're just taking it out of equities and sending it out to help pay benefit payments. So it's an efficiency. I think it's lowering the cost and improving the ability for us to execute the process. So those are the benefits. The negative is that the cost, and we need to still work through this, is people had assumed that, right? The income distribution and the regular occurrence, and they were reporting. So we need to modify the reports and show that, it's still, we can still provide how much income, CAPP generated over a year. But just because it generated, we don't automatically want to distribute that income from exactly where it was generated. We might say, hey, the prices in U.S. equities went up a lot. We should sell some of that and distribute part of that to help pay this net cash need. And so that's a process now. But these reports that Sean passed out earlier, we will be modifying these reports to include some additional information, and the Board of Investments will be working with Sean and his team here to determine what other reports are needed and useful to maintain everything you need to do from your financial statements and how you're looking at this stuff. And we're confident that we can provide that information. So, but that's the step we are at now, is going through and recognizing some of these reports now that should be modified and getting you those modified reports with the information. But we're not going to go back and distribute income automatically for any of the plans, just because we believe it's inefficient. We believe it hurts kind of the longer term return. It's an additional cost because it ends up we do more trades. Is that?
Just a question. I guess from my perspective as a board member, one of the concerns that I've had as we've gone through the change is just, I don't want to use this in a political way at all. It appears like a lack of transparency because we're not getting as much information about all of the processes as we did before. And in my case, where I've been on the board for a really long time, at one point in time, we didn't get comparisons with our peers when I originally got on the board. And it's harder to understand how those comparisons fit into what we're doing with CAPP now. So I guess I'd just like to see, because all of these, whether it's a monthly report or whether it's a disbursement or whatever, they give us a little bit more information to understand what's happening in the big picture, as opposed to the once a year snapshot or the once a quarter snapshots that sometimes we appear to be getting with reports we have right now. It's just not quite, in my mind, it'd be nice to see a little bit more information.
Sure, and that is our goal, right? We believe we can achieve both these efficiencies and the flexibility, and also increase the transparency, right? So, as I said previously, we had these 6 pools, 5 of them non-cash, right? And we've really expanded that list to 12 to give you more
and that helps.
More insight. But if I believe, if there's things that you believe we have dropped in terms of transparency and information you need, we're all for that, right? So we can work with Sean and his staff to make sure we give you that level of transparency, because the goal here was not to decrease transparency, but provide a framework that allows us to actually provide more transparency, while still, reducing the cost of the implementation of the investment strategy and improving the efficiency. So that.
And I think all of us appreciate that, because I think we saw that as well. It's just that we've been, I don't know how long we've been in this plan, in the CAPP process, I guess I'll call it.
Oh, CAPP? Only in CAPP since April 1st of this year.
Yeah, so it'd just be nice to see a little bit more information because of the change, so we can, so that picture that we have, or that overview that we have, continues to show us.
Can you talk a little bit about this page that's titled Teachers Retirement?
Yeah,
so I think some of that information's here, but I think Joe can address.
Some of it's there because you explained a little bit more to me on there, but part of part of what I'm missing in the CAPP reporting is, it's a nice overview of the entire pool, but it doesn't actually explain, so, what part of that pool is from these different plans? I'm not expecting that you would break down the pool per plan at all, but it'd be just nice to know, we've got, 10.8 billion in there. 3.9 of that's teachers, 5.6 of that is, it'd be nice to just have a couple more pieces of information that show the bigger picture.
And we definitely can provide that. I mean, that exactly what you just described, right, I provided to our board last week. So that's available. So anything that you have an interest in transparency, right, if you just write it down and through Sean communicate to us, my guess is a lot of that we can do, right, but it's, but that is the stage that we're at now, right? And because we made this change, it allows us and you an opportunity to say, well, is what we had before adequate, right? What have we been getting for years that do we want to maintain? What additional information might we want, right? And that's kind of where we are now. So it's more of a request to you, right, to define to us what level of transparency that you're looking for, and then we can come back to you and say, well, here's our thoughts on how meeting that need, right? Happy to walk through this report. It doesn't contain the exact list like you're saying of all the pool's percentage of CAP, but we could easily provide that report. We provide it to our board on a quarterly basis.
Does it also break down what were the old pools and have performance versus benchmark for each of the asset classes?
Yeah, so let me
as opposed to just using the blended benchmark.
So let me go there first, and then I'll get back to the team. So if you can look at the Consolidated Asset Pension Pool report, right? So at the top, again, this report is for the whole pool, right? But because you're a participant in the pool, you're experiencing what the pool's experiencing in terms of the allocation and in terms of the performance down below. The dollars, the market value is the entire market value, but we can add a page to this that shows, who are the different participants in the pool and what their allocation is of the pool. But to the question, if you go down to the bottom part of the page and you look at returns, and look at domestic equity as an example, right? And it says domestic equity on the second line there under returns, and it says PAC. Really, what that stands for is pension asset class, right? So it's domestic equity as part of the pension, and if you read across there, those are the returns. Now, it's same type of number we provided to you historically for the domestic equity pool. These are called time-weighted returns, right? And so as of, this is now August, right? Each month since April 1st, so with April end, May end, June, July, up through August, this return is coming from this domestic equity PAC, right? But the longer term returns, we're linking it to the domestic equity pool. The reality is they're the same thing, we just switched the name, right? So it's the same account on State Street and the same numbers. We just said, instead of calling it a pool now because it's a part of this combined asset pool, let's call it the domestic equity asset class, right? But we can only get 3 and 5 and 10 year and inception to date numbers for that asset class, which started in May 1st of 2003. That's what's in the far right column, because we're linking it. Now, if you flip the page, you'll see what the benchmark is, right? And so we have the benchmark for domestic equity. This too has kind of changed over time, right? And so if you look at domestic equity, this is on benchmarks, it says PAC Custom Blend 2. And if it's really Custom Blend 2 is referring to the footnote on the third page, right? And you'll see the footnote says, from inception to 4/30/2017, we use the S&P 1500 as our benchmark for U.S. equity. We decided earlier this year, we recommended to our board, they approved it, to switch the benchmark to the MSCI US IMI gross. At the end, people have probably heard of S&P because they hear of reference the S&P 500. Most people probably don't even know the S&P 1500 exists, right? But the difference between the 500 and the 1500 is more names, right? So the additional names beyond the 500 are just including more stocks in the U.S. market.
Joe, can I ask you a question about that? So the 1500, because it is more companies, it also implies that there's a lot more mid-sized and small companies, which historically have a better total return. So how does that correlate with your own holdings in U.S. equities? Is it roughly a similar composite?
It is, but over a longer period of time, we have actually been slightly overweighted both mid and small. Because we believe over a longer period of time, not just because history will have shown this, but history does, that small and mid have done better over a longer period than large. So we believe we should be investing not just in the largest companies in this country, but in the full spectrum of companies, small, mid, and large. And both of these, S&P 1500 or this MSCI, are really looking at the same thing. The reason why we switched to MSCI is for years, we've used MSCI on the non-US equity side. So we thought it made sense for transparency and reporting and management to have our US equity and our non-US equity have a similar index provider. So now we take the MSCI US IMI that we have here, and we combine it to, you see footnote 3, the MSC ACWI ex-US. Those two combined by this one provider, MSCI, gives us an MSCI global benchmark. So it works in terms of its structure. So the benchmark did change, but we continue also for the benchmark, back to that table right above, you'll see that the domestic equity benchmark return goes out for 10 years, right? So just because we move to this CAPP pool, it's not like we're stopping to provide returns on these asset classes we've invested in historically. What you'll find though is if you go back to the first page and look at the returns, you'll find some of these newer breakouts of fixed income and like natural resources. Right now, we don't have a 3-year track record, right? So we're starting to build the track record there because previously, those in themselves weren't tracked. They were part of this broader fixed income pool, or the natural resources part of it, as I described earlier, were part of the private equity pool or the real estate pool. So I view, as we move forward in time, we're providing greater transparency to these more finer level of asset class definitions. But yeah, as of now, we don't want to just create a 5-year return for natural resources or for mortgage-backed securities, but they have been part of the longer-term numbers in the other pools that we have.
Can I ask one more question? This is a very broad spectrum question about your overall long-term assumption of 7 3/4. As I'm sure you're aware, developed countries tend to have compressions of GDP. As they become more developed, they have less growth because they're more developed. And historically, for the past 30 or 40 years, it's pretty clear that GDPs worldwide are also compressing. There's been a lot of discussion among a lot of other state plans that as a result of that, maybe these assumptions for return will also begin to compress. Do you have much concern about that general demographic trend? And if so, how do you assess that?
I don't have a short answer for you. But I would say first off, the 7 3/4 is not we're not developing it, right?
Okay.
That number is from the actuaries based upon the asset allocation we have. And that.
Looking back.
No, they're looking forward, right? They're taking the asset allocation we have and I believe they look at July 1st every year as they do valuation, and they look at that, and then they look forward in time. I can't give you the exact number, but say it's 40 or 50 years. It's a long period. And they say, well, what do they think that number is? Now, part of how they look forward is look back and understand how things have evolved, right? And they come up with that number. We tend not to look at things 40 to 50 years, right? We want to be long-term investors. We're not looking to try to predict what's going to happen tomorrow, the end of next month. But it's a little bit easier for us to look 5 or 10 years out, right? And so that's what we're doing as we're forming and changing the asset allocation on the margin, right? So there are a number of things that have happened over the last 10 years, even more over the last 20, and we don't expect that to change. We think going forward the next 10, the next 20, or the next 40, there's going to be a lot of changes, right? And so the actuary is being somewhat charged to put that all in and think about that over a very long period of time, and they're looking for very meaningful trends, right? We are looking a little bit more dynamically and say, let's take that into account, but we want to be responsive if something's changing, over a 5-year period. If that maybe we should own a little bit more or a little bit less of that, right? And other plans like you're talking about, they're doing similar things, but they're doing things based upon their own needs and circumstances that might be different than us, right? So fixed income's the easiest example, and I already shared this before. Yeah, the expected returns for fixed income have come down over the last 20 years. Are they always going to be as low as they are now? Probably not, right? And so I think that's a reasonable assumption, right? That over the next 40 years, we will likely see fixed income returns or interest rates higher than they are today. So it needs to be dynamic, right? And I do think we're thinking about that. I do think the actuary is thinking about that. But we're not trying to spend too much time predicting, right? We're trying to spend more time preparing and being reasonable about our allocations to give us a good long-term chance of achieving these financial goals. But we're not spending a lot of time saying, well, where is the equity markets, U.S. equity markets, going to finish this calendar year? I'm not too worried about that. My guess is different than today's level, right? But we need to prepare whether it's higher or lower and know kind of what we would do in response to that. So we're spending more time preparing and developing kind of action plans, what we would do if it happens, if valuations change, and not too much time predicting and predetermining our actions.
And Joey, I know CAPP is new, so I can understand why we don't have much in the way of performance information on CAPP, but we've always calculated inception to date for a consolidated view of our asset allocation and our returns. Can we still do that?
Yeah, so if you go back to this first page, this first handout that's called Teacher's Retirement Plan on the top left, and you go down to the bottom on returns, you'll see the Teacher's Retirement Plan.
Okay.
You'll see that line. That is the composite of, these last few months, it was the composite of STIP and CAPP. But over the last several years, it's a composite of all these pools. If you go down a few lines from that, you'll see Teacher's Retirement Custom Benchmark, right? So previously, the custom benchmark, before we went to CAPP, was the components were a benchmark for each of these 6 pools. Today, that custom benchmark it has 2 components, the benchmark for STIP and the benchmark for CAPP. But the benchmark for CAPP is determined by the benchmarks for each of these underlying asset classes. So we have longer term, both for the plan, have a composite return and a composite benchmark, so that hasn't changed, and we don't, but some of these, as you go down layers and layers, and we've built in more transparency, some of those are gonna take some time to evolve such that we get a 5 or 10-year number. But it's in that way, I think we're giving more information, right? So where we had a number before, those pools, domestic equity, private equity, you'll see for each of those a longer-term number and a longer-term benchmark. So everything is still rolling up. I think that information, it is a different report and a different format that you had in the past, but it's more information as opposed to less information that's here.
So the portfolio weighted benchmarks that you're using for the CAPP,
Yeah.
those exist.
Yeah.
So why don't we have a number in that space?
So tell me.
So under the inception to date CAPP custom benchmark, because those benchmarks exist, even though the CAPP has only existed since April, why couldn't we list that?
You're saying for the underlying benchmark. So
Correct.
you're under the CAPP report,
Correct.
right? I just wanted to take everyone's eyes to the same place.
Teacher's retirement, last line on the page, the CAPP custom benchmark, which is based on number 3
Yeah.
on the other page, all
Yeah.
those benchmarks exist. And we know what the portfolio weightings are, so we should be able to actually produce what that index is.
We could, but the previous to CAPP existing, it was, trying to figure out how to explain it. So it doesn't seem right to me to have a CAPP custom benchmark before it existed, right? But all that information is embedded in the teacher's retirement custom benchmark, right? And we provide it for each underlying asset class, right? But so we can't have a 5-year return for the CAPP custom benchmark because that didn't exist over the last 5 years. But if you look at its components, that did exist over that entire period of the last 5 years, like all the 5 pools, the 6 pools, domestic equity, international, real estate, private equity, bonds, and cash. Under the CAPP, we are providing kind of asset class benchmarks for each of those, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the end, the 7.75, right? That's not CAPP, right? That's the that's the teacher's retirement plan absolute number, right? So benchmarks are important. They give us some feedback, but at the end of the day, it's that absolute number that's our focus, right? And so as it's really on, again, this teacher's retirement plan, the return section, that first line, as a board, that you should care most about in looking at it. Now, after you look at that line, then look at the lines below, look at this other report to understand what is driving it. But we, the inception to date number there for the teacher's retirement plan, so I'm going way over to the right, 7.74. That's surprisingly consistent with the actuarial, return assumption. Now, you'll see the 10-year number is 5.62, right? And the 5-year number is 9.49. So even though it's a 10-year number, that's going to move around a fair amount. It has in the last few years, it will in the next few years, because in the 10-year number now is the 2008, 2009 returns. When those roll off, that number is going to go up all of a sudden, right? But the 7.74 number, just because of that action, isn't going to move that much, right? But so it's these longer term numbers that are really the best feedback loop to you and to us. Are we achieving kind of the goals? We understand as the shorter term numbers, or even these multi-year windows move forward in time, there's going to be volatility in those numbers. But our key focus is this inception to date, and how does that align over time with the actuarial return, and as that might change over time too.
Okay, I appreciate that. Just a quick follow-up. I guess the only concern I have is you have established with a fair amount of hard work, I'm sure, what appropriate benchmarks are for all of these asset classes. And those benchmarks have existed for many, many years, all of them. They could be back tested to show what the inception to date returns on the benchmark would be. I would be very curious to know those numbers, because if if either 2 or 3 on those benchmarks were significantly lower or higher than your target of 7 3/4, that would indicate a theoretical problem in the asset structure.
Okay, so a few things. For each of the asset classes, there are benchmarks. Those benchmarks all had inception dates, and they're all different.
Correct.
Right? So like TIPS, even U.S. Treasury, right, that's relatively new, right? That's only been around several years, where we can get U.S. equity returns back, about 100 years, right? And so the inception to date of any of those benchmarks, because the inception date is different, they're not comparable, right? So you can't take a 30-year and a three-year. So we understand those returns, but to your second point, we expect returns to be different for different asset classes. We expect that the 7.75 actuarial return, how we're going to get that over time, is largely by investing in equity-related securities, whether it be public or private. And so those expected returns are going to be higher than, say, the fixed income expected returns that were lower. So fixed income, probably for almost any period of time, if you came up with just an expected return for fixed income, it would be lower than the overall plan expected return, which also includes equities. We have fixed income for diversification. Now, as you look at historical fixed income times, there have been years fixed income has done extremely well, more than the 7 3/4, but there are other years that it will even be negative, right, based upon what interest rates are doing. Just because it's a low number, to us, doesn't mean it's a bad asset class. We need to understand what that asset class, what that benchmark represents in terms of opportunity, the potential long-term return, but also the risk.
I understand why you have asset allocation. I'm just saying that on your benchmarks, even with TIPS, which may only go back 5 or 6 years, you could put a 3-year or a 5-year benchmark return assumption in there by back testing those benchmarks.
We can do it for each of the benchmarks. We can't do it for CAPP because we don't have allocations to apply to those benchmarks. That's my point.
Your allocations are right here.
But the actual allocations you're talking about, I think what you're talking about is the teacher's retirement custom benchmark.
Right.
Right? So we can provide that as a composite, the percentage in each asset class times the benchmark return in that asset class, and sum it up. That's what's in that teacher. But each asset class, so again, if you look at domestic equity, right? You look at each of these asset classes, we're providing benchmarks over the last 10 years. On this report that says Consolidated Asset Pension Pools. So if you go on the page 2 here, each of these asset classes have benchmarks going back 10 years. So,
okay.
Sorry if I'm missing.
No. Okay. I understand now why you don't have the CAPP custom benchmark in there. Thank you.
Okay.
A little slow.
No, communication is important, so apologies, but so that's benchmarks. That's we've talked about. The cost here is we still need to get over some hurdles to improve the reporting from you, and so as we hear from you there, we can work towards doing that. But we believe with this enhanced reporting, we will meet all of your future kind of needs and current needs for transparency. And but we do believe this change was done well, implemented well, confirmed by independent parties, and we do believe it provides us, as going forward, the flexibility to manage the assets in a way that we haven't had historically. So maybe that's one thing I should make a point of. So I did say with these pools, we historically rebalance once a month, 12 times a year. Now we can do it any day. We're not going to do it on every day, right? But the fact that we could do it on any day It doesn't have to be like a month end to 1 month. So if something materially happened, you know, you needed more money, you know, the asset classes in the markets, you know, change significantly, we can readjust, right? So we're not limited to 12 times a year. We can, now, just because we can do it, as I said, we're not gonna do it, right? On average, I still expect us to refine and rebalance closer to once a month, but already between April 1st and now, we have done it at other times other than month end, because we thought that was warranted to rebalance. So that idea of flexibility isn't just theory. We've already applied that and used that in the last few months to benefit the plan. So sorry for taking so much time.
No, just to clarify, at a minimum, then, at least once a year at the end of the fiscal year is when you will record in the accounting system the appreciation or depreciation and the interest earnings.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct, we will do that, in the fiscal year end closing period, which is July 1st through approximately July 25th. We will be recording those entries on your behalf in the Sabre system.
Okay.
I'm sorry, something else has come to my mind that, and I'm not sure if I'm understanding correctly, but is there anything in the process change or the practice change in going to CAPP that you would consider a commingling of trust assets among the retirement systems that didn't exist in the past? No.
No, because in the past when we had the 6 pools, STIP, as well as the 5 pension-only pools, all of that money from the pool perspective was invested on behalf of the pool. But individual participants' shares were always very uniquely and distinctly tracked and reported. And so we don't consider that a commingling of funds. That scenario still exists today under CAPP as it existed with the 5 previous pools. Our STIP pool, for example, we have almost 500 participants in our STIP pools. So it's just on a pool basis that they're taking that money and buying individual securities.
So I'm just gonna flat out ask whether you considered whether there might be any qualified trust considerations in making this change. If you did consider that, whether you got advice that that is not the case. I guess I always am looking at these issues from the perspective of, are we meeting our qualification requirements under IRS standards? And I mean, it didn't occur to me until we had this conversation today that might be something I needed to be concerned about. I'm wondering if you were, and if you resolved those issues, even with respect to state statutes, because there are provisions in state law, or at least there were.
The state statute requires that your money is tracked on a separate basis.
Correct.
Denise, when we went into this project, we had numerous conversations as a staff as to risks. We had conversations with other states. We had conversations, as Joe explained, with our custodial bank. Because the phenomenon existed that we were distinctly and separately tracking your investments in the old structure as well as in the new structure. That did change. And so we were not concerned that we were commingling of the funds or tracking them separately that would violate a state statute or an IRS statute from that perspective.
Okay.
So although this is a consolidation of plans, we have other assets that are being managed for the state. We're not combining those here, right? These are pension only, right? Qualified pension assets, and so I think we're very comfortable that the steps that we've taken and working with others have ensured that the continued appropriate status of
When we look at our reconciliation processes, we have numerous reconciliation levels. We are not only reconciling on a pool basis where we are looking at everything at the pool, but we're also reconciling each and every participant in and out of that pool and tracking it down to that level. So we have those multiple reconciliations that we can show that teachers, you got your dollar, this is your dollar that came out.
It was very clear. You made
it's, to me, very clear.
Well, apologies it took so long.
Okay. Thank you.
But at any time you would like us, or anyone from our team to come back and answer any questions, I'm happy to do so, and look forward to hearing from you all in terms of what additional, transparency or reporting would be helpful to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate your time. Right, we'll move on to administrative business. And we're a little bit behind, but we have a lot of time this afternoon, so we should be fine. We need to move some things around, Tammy?
No.
Okay, we're good?
Yep.
We're good. All right. Do we need public comment?
Sure.
Is there anything that,
I have public comment. I want to thank you for giving so much of your time to us at the Educators Conference and for your staff to go out and do our pre-retirement presentations. I think it makes a big difference to our members. They feel more comfortable. Your staff does a nice job. They're patient. They just do wonderful work there. So thank you for that. And I appreciate the extra member benefit officer, and I'm hoping that we can continue to expand opportunities. We're gonna have a webinar November 9th, and so hoping that goes just as well as the face-to-face presentations, and that we can schedule more of those. Thank you. I can find out any way I want to. In reverse, but done.
let's get on to our administrative business.
Okay. So, Jeff is up first with the investment report. I think we heard quite a bit.
Yeah, what he said. Only a couple of things that I would mention. I was gonna talk about the CAPP and all that business. I think I covered that pretty well. I did make a point, on the record at the last meeting, talking about the 7.75, in fact, to date, that is what, in fact, we have made. And, I think that's an important point to make. That it is achievable. It doesn't matter what skepticism says. We can certainly talk about it. Yeah, we can talk about in the future what we think about it. We as a board set that from advice from our council. So I thought that was important. I did also think it was interesting that now that this pool exists, the only real difference in the annual return for all of the different entities that are in that CAPP pool really has to do with the amount of money they have in STIP. So the STIP isn't exactly the same. The difference really comes from the cash need for the most part. And so the 100th or 200ths of a point difference is from that STIP. Been interesting so far. I didn't realize it was 10 or 12 meetings a year, but so far so good.
They have to.
Some of them are 2 days, some are 1 day, yeah. And they proposed last time to do 2 additional days to make them all 2 days.
Meter mileage reimbursement.
Oh my. And so this is the second time I've been in Helena this week.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Jeff. I know we had proposed before you were on the board that these two were going to share the duty because, wow, it's a big one. It's not a small task for any of us. I know my school wouldn't even allow that. All right, so the financial statements.
Before we move on, Madam Chair, just one comment. The one thing that, and I've mentioned this to Sean, as well, one thing that it would be nice to know, and I don't know that the Board of Investments is even has the ability to pull this up, but it'd be nice to know how we're doing with, in comparison to other pension systems.
In other states or just
Other comparable, it wouldn't even have to be comparable. I mean, NASRA has 80-some members. It'd be nice to know where our investment reporting lies in relation to our peers.
So I think there's NCPERS and there's NASRA. I mean, there may be one report available for that. I don't know that BOI would be able to get it, but I might be able to find something. And if I do, I'll forward it on. I don't think they would look at necessarily exactly what other pension plans.
Well, at some point in time, that was included in our report years ago. And that's just something that's kind of nice to know. Did we, were we in the upper quarter of systems in terms of that, that equity, that market information? By pool or whatever?
Well, EOI does look at how do they compare against their peers,
Well,
but their peers are
but
different.
their peers are different. No, I mean, most of what they're, almost all of their benchmarking is on the company. So, they're not comparing their information with other retirement systems.
Diane from NEMIT, if I might, they do compare they have that RV pension report, which I think does take pension plans above their size and runs a comparison. I think they do it quarterly, but I haven't looked on their website lately, so Jeff can know more about that. RVK, I think is what they call it.
Yeah, we get stuff from RVK every time so far, but I haven't heard anything in those reports about that. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just try to do that as well.
Madam Chair, members of the board. So I guess this is kind of a good lead in, all that investment stuff, because what you're going to see is because of the shift to CAPP, they, and when I say they, the Board of Investments no longer actually records the investment. What we call the revenue on a monthly basis, or they're just doing it once a year now at the very end of the year. So because of that, these financial statements that I present to you are going to look significantly different than they have in the past, and it's going to actually, show that we have, a large loss, if you will. Expenses are much larger than our revenue because those revenues, these financial statements that I show actually come. The underlying values or amounts in all these come from our SABRE system, which is our state accounting system, and all these, amounts are, our largest part of our assets are obviously investments, and so Board of Investments does all of the accounting entries on our behalf in those investment accounts. And that includes our investment revenue. So if you look on page 23, you'll see this shows our investment revenue by source. And so you can see as of 8/31 of 16, we have about 18 million at this point in that fiscal year, which was like 2 months into the fiscal year. They're showing 18 million in investment revenue, and that's by each pool. They're making those entries. When I say they, Board of Investments is making those entries because they're distributing that revenue, which is so now if you shift to this year, you can see that it looks like a few, in that investment depreciation that they made, some small entries there. But really the only entries that have been booked in SABREs in our accounting system is on the short-term investment pool. So you can see the large difference, and that carries through from page 23 to page 22 when you see the investment revenue I guess it's the third line down there. You can see that, last year our total revenue, which is our contributions and our investment revenue, last year was about 48 million at this time, and this year it's showing 29 million. Now, according to Board of Investments and what you just heard, that's because they're not booking it. It's not that it's not there. All those, I guess, coupon payments from the bonds and all the dividends that are coming in from our stocks are just being reinvested into the asset allocations, however they see fit, rather than being booked into SABREs.
So one time a year it's gonna look really good, the rest of the time we're gonna look.
It's possible, or we just won't know.
Yeah.
We just won't know. I mean, it could be, if it's bad year, we just won't know that until you need. That's why, but I mean, that's why it would be nice to see that once a month. And theoretically, if they can do it once a year, they can do it once a month, but that's my 2 cents on that.
Well, they can show it in a report once a month, not
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah, and we can,
That's what I
so
was
it's possible that we can,
We don't have to put it into Sabres, but we can at least know.
yeah, it's
Is that what
possible
you're
that we
saying?
can change the way we present these, financial reports. I mean, I could take, possible some of these investment, amounts from these RVK reports, is that these are RVK?
State Street.
State Street reports, and plug those into these amounts, but it just won't be like a one-to-one for our accounting system from Sabres. So that's, so due to the revenue, you'll see, obviously our revenue over expenses last year about 8 million in the negative, which is kind of what we would expect to see in a mature plan. Whereas this year it's showing a 30 million, and that's just going to continue to grow as long as we don't change how we're showing these reports.
It'll just grow until July.
You're right, until June, June 30th,
Right.
they'll make that entry.
Well, in part, that's why I asked the question that I asked in terms of the transparency side, because it appears as if we don't have.
Yeah, and I think, correct me if I'm Sean and I, we think the same way, but we can also, if we can get this information from another report, it'll just be different than what the board has historically
Even
seen.
if it's estimated revenue or something like that, it'd be
Right.
nice to know that's there.
Something that,
Agree.
yeah, so we're gonna have to figure that out with, between us and Board of Investments and what works best to present to the board, because, obviously just continuing to show that, we're gonna, have no revenue or what we could have historically called revenue, maybe it's not gonna be recorded, but we can at least, have an amount in there so that the board can see that. So that, obviously that carries through to the next page, which gives you like your page 21 of your balance sheet, and those, those amounts, that year-to-date income loss is seen towards the bottom there in the fund balance, where, it was 30 million in the negative, versus the 8 million. And then that obviously carries through to the total, liabilities and total assets, So if there's any other questions on the, these, again, I think these are gonna have to change in the future if this is how Board of Investments is gonna book things into Sabres, we're gonna have to change in order to present a more accurate depiction of what's going on.
I think on page 23 also, you may need eventually to change the term, because I don't think they're gonna use retirement funds bond pool. That's the CAPP, the consolidated, so.
Yeah, and actually I should have put that in here. It's actually a whole new line item that we
Yeah.
should have put CAPP in there, so.
I knew it'd change eventually, but.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
But
That's
it makes it look bad, and they should be able to give us something. It's at least an estimate, so we can.
Yeah, I think they can actually, they can provide us the actuals by month in one of these State Street reports. It's just that I'm not gonna put that entry in
Right.
Sabres, and then we can turn around.
At least there's a paper trail that says,
Yeah.
here, Nolan, this is how much you can put in there.
Right,
And just-
And be safer that.
We don't have one job.
right, exactly.
And just from an accounting standpoint, the reason it's nice if they're booked in Sabres is because then I can tie to what this looks like versus, in Sabres it comes out with many account codes. If I showed it to you, it would make no sense, where I can take those numbers and put them into something that makes sense. If we're not gonna have those booked into Sabres, we're gonna have to come up with another way of kind of saying, well, here's the estimated revenue, even though it's not technically in Sabres yet.
Because you would know, but we as a board would have, we just no idea.
Right, and right now we don't.
Yeah,
So
right
until
now
they
it's-
start showing that it's in the
You guys
report.
don't even know.
Yeah, right.
Alright.
That's disconcerting.
That's why we've been having meetings with them.
Yeah.
But I think we'll get there. They have the information, it's just a matter of enhancing statements and their reports.
So if there's no other questions on the financial statements, page 24, 25 is gonna be our operating budget today, as of August 31st. And then our M-Trust Phase 3, budget status report. Both, everything's looking good. It's really hard to project, what's gonna be spent only 2 months into the fiscal year, but based on all of our estimates, we're projected to have a surplus this year. We haven't had any unexpected expenses come up or anything. And same with the M-Trust Phase 3 budget. We don't haven't had any out of the ordinary expenses that have come up that would push us into the red or anything. So, any questions on any of the? Either the operating. 26 is just our contracted services, which is a large portion of our budget, and everything looks fine and as it should there. And then our delinquent agency report is, this was as of earlier, in September, and we've since received several of these outstanding reports, and I believe. I'd have to double check, but the only larger report that's Sydney Public Schools has actually submitted their reports. We're waiting for some checks to come in from them, which has taken longer than it should. So that's follow up with them. Any other questions on any? That's all I have. Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you.
Thanks for explaining that to us. The NAPA report, please.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. It's been so long since I went to the NAPA convention. I'm not sure how much good information I can give you. Again, though, thank you for sending me. I will say, although I can't remember specifics now, that it was a great conference. It always is. Again, security was a huge issue. 2 NAPA conferences this year. Had substantial conversation about security. We talked last board meeting about sort of the internal initiative in that arena. Something interesting came up at the NAPA conference, and that was that a private letter ruling was issued, not to us of course, but to another public pension plan in I want to say March or May of 2017, just prior to the NAPA conference, that is specific to us in a way, and I haven't even necessarily had this conversation with Sean yet, but we have, if any of you are familiar with the termination pay sort of limitations and how things like retirement incentives and that can be laid out in a collective bargaining agreement and qualify as termination pay for TRS purposes. We've long had this requirement that people could not be given an election between something that qualifies as termination pay and something that does not qualify as termination pay. If they're given that election, none of it can be used as termination pay for our purposes. And that was based on prior sort of IRS guidance on being able to make a deferral election. Now there is a specific private letter ruling that expressly says that if there is if there's that kind of election allowed, of course it was more related to severance pay. Strictly speaking, most plans don't do termination pay the way that we do, but severance pay in particular, that does constitute a prohibited deferral or election arrangement that can disqualify the plan. So we've been doing the right thing all along. It's just now very clear under IRS standards, under a private letter ruling, that is a qualification issue. So nothing changes for us, but it's just sort of interesting to know that they do look at those things, and they've made determinations in similar arenas. So if anybody in the room has the ability to determine how collective bargaining agreements look, they might keep that in mind as well.
Lots of people.
Yes, important to know though.
But really no change from our.
No, absolutely, no, absolutely not. And when we look at them, that's the decision people always get. We get pushback on it. Now I have a, nice 3-page document that I can send people and say, absolutely cannot do it, but to not do it up front would be even better.
The moral of the story for those who could possibly affect collective bargaining agreements is to send that information to you
Yeah,
and
really,
say,
truly.
does this work before you agree to it?
Precisely, absolutely. That's, or not does it work, but, how will we treat it, and then you make your decision. Correct. So, also a lot of conversation at the NAPA conference about the number of systems that are, based on experience studies, deciding to reduce their actuarial return assumptions and how that should be done. And the number of systems apparently, and it's not the preferred or the suggested methods by most actuaries, are stepping down if they're making a change, they're stepping it down gradually. The argument is that is not actuarially supportable, because if you know upfront you're going to reduce it over a period of time, then you're essentially saying it should be the lowest possible amount now. So the recommendation from the actuarial panel was to make the change to what it needs to be in one fell swoop, but gradually implement the financial impact of that. So, you would change your return assumption, but you would only increase contribution rates or supplemental contributions or that over a period of time to account for that reduction in change. And apparently that is, there are some changes in actuarial standards that are being looked at as well that are going to be presumably causing more plans to reduce their assumed rate of return or strongly considering it. So it'll be interesting after our experience study to see where things stand. I'm not sure that there's a whole lot more that was terribly new. Huge still undertaking in undercutting pension, defined benefit pensions, in John Laura Arnold Foundation, Joshua Rao arena. I was telling some people internally not long back that we had heard at a NAPA conference that a number of the think tanks that are working on this, including John Laura Arnold Foundation and Pew, are going after law professors. They're offering to provide educational programs to lawyers, to continuing legal education, and to professors at law schools about the problems of defined benefit pension plans and how legally those should be addressed. And I have received some of those flyers, so it is actually happening. I'm not exactly sure what we do about that, but I sort of made up my mind that when I see one come from the University of Montana School of Law, that we need to call them up and offer a counterpoint to the conversation. So.
Like Mitchell understood the other.
Somebody else standing in the room giving the other side of the story would be my recommendation. So. Exactly. So I think that's really sort of the high points. There's been a lot going on the NAPA listserv lately about working retirees again. It's an issue, and third-party employers of working retirees being a hugely growing problem in other states. Not that we haven't seen it as well, but I think we're small enough not to be a state that's as impacted by I'm trying to say, the private employers of teachers who then lease them out to public school districts. But we are seeing some of it.
Yeah. What's that?
Where and what way? Where are you seeing it?
Well, there's a few different avenues. I mean, one would be sort of, without saying names, I mean, you have these propped up might not be the right word.
So they
But
special
they could be like
co-ops
a-
or the actual
Yeah,
teachers?
they're,
We actually,
they're, like, we have an example of a co-op that exists only on paper, and then they have an agreement with another entity, which they're almost the same entity, but they're not, so they end up being a third-party employer, and then they lease their employees to the co-op. So it's,
we actually.
we're seeing more and more.
And we actually did get a working retiree question, I wanna say maybe 2 weeks ago, from someone who is working for an out-of-state corporation. In Montana, yes, and it asked the question whether it was TRS reportable or not. And of course, we have the provision in our statute that says it's reportable, which
So
is,
working in a school district, employed by an out-of-state
yes,
corporation.
Third party, yeah.
yes.
What, Denise, what is the
Yeah.
leverage that these kinds of organizations use with the teachers? What purported benefit?
They get to retire and go back to work. That is the entire objective
It's not
of,
the 1/3 limitation.
Correct.
I see.
at least that's the argument.
Yeah, that's what they're hoping. I mean,
Yeah.
we've been determining in those cases that it is reportable and they are subject to the 1/3 earnings limit. I'm not sure why, from a financial perspective, why these entities are sort of coming to be and providing those services, why districts aren't doing it, other than they don't wanna hire full-time employees and they wanna just contract out for these services.
Right, and I will say that I think that that's a large part of it. It's probably about a 50-50 issue, whether it's the financial savings to the school district of hiring an independent contractor, not paying the benefits, not having the employee carrying costs essentially, along with the working retiree issue, but we are starting to see more of those come into the state. We're also seeing, just as a heads up, more of our educational cooperatives turning themselves into 501c3s with the understanding, and I think it's being expressed to them by the School Boards Association, that makes them then not subject to TRS requirements, that if they're a 501c3, I don't know what the argument is, that they're no longer a governmental entity, which is not legally true, but we are getting, it's something we've addressed in the past, but it seems to be more prevalent now as well, that if you create, if a school district or a group of school districts create a 501c3, that they then fall outside of TRS.
So creating a nonprofit to hire their employees.
Basically,
Well,
because they're already tax exempt.
A good example would be, it would be very easy for a school district who has a requirement to have X number of FTE for curriculum, to hire a curriculum consortium to provide those services. And that curriculum consortium would be a nonprofit agency per se that believes that they're not government entity and they're not providing services to students. And we've had those in the past. We've specifically dealt with whether it's special ed cooperatives or several different kinds of cooperatives that we find 5 years after the fact that they've had an executive director, they've had an employee providing these services and not
Is that another thing we should be sending out, like a memo to School Boards Association saying, this is not a way out? I mean, I think if we're proactive, you cannot tell people they're still going to have to pay the teacher's retirement, period.
Yes, and
State law.
And to some extent, that's where some of this arose. A couple of years back, we did the review of the CSPDs and REISs, notified them all that they did the full legal analysis on paper and told them you are a TRS employer. If you hire people and, doing work that's reportable to TRS, you have to report them. And so the CSPDs and REISs are what we have seen But now full service education cooperatives as well are, because they buy the insurance for the school district, they do many things, not just provide TRS reportable sort of personnel, but,
So yeah, we did targeted communications to them and what required compliance. And compliance was actually good. I mean, we got information back, they've been reporting, and now all of a sudden we're hearing sort of murmurs that this approach is coming. I guess we'll have to deal with it. With more
we're no
time.
longer that.
The cycle comes around, because we've had this before.
Yeah. I throw that out there just again from the perspective of, when you are dealing with them in your home areas. If you have the opportunity to clarify to people that if they think they're changing their legal status with TRS, they better put it in writing and submit it to us and get a determination before they take action. Because once again, I believe they're being advised by people who are not interpreting correctly.
I think part of the confusion is this PERS not managing the same.
I would say that's correct. I would say that's true. Particularly where you're talking about the full service education cooperatives, where they have many positions that would also be PERS covered as opposed to TRS covered. So yes, I think you're right.
And it just seems, from the outside looking, it just seems like teachers makes a big deal of it, tries to make sure people understand what's going on in their course.
Yep.
But essentially implies exactly the same thing.
This,
There's a difference.
So that finishes the NAPA report. I'm sorry, I went a little far.
it's good. We did do the NCTR trustee report at the last
Oh, we
meeting,
did?
correct?
Mm-hmm.
We did do that at the last meeting. They talked about their trip to.
Okay, I was thinking that we did. I don't know why.
It wasn't very memorable. Our report, not the report.
Okay, I thought
I
for some
remember.
reason, okay, I remember.
And then we have dates next, so.
It's
So,
the first
at least the first one, December 8th, how does that look for everyone?
I thought it was.
The 8th is a Friday.
So good for me.
No, it is the 8th. Looks good. Must have been the 4th last year.
Yeah,
At least, if we get that, we could just put that out there for the 16th as well. We're looking at just a couple ahead, but we don't have to go all the way through. It's too hard,
yeah.
especially in everybody's crazy lives, but
February 16th.
yeah,
It's good.
so that we're thinking about it ahead. And then public comment on any of that we just went over.
I appreciate your plan and your diligence on independent contractor thing. There is a lot of confusion out there, and I know in our workshops that's explained every time that they do belong in being reported or going against earnings, and so it is an issue, and with schools having more opportunities under 329, in addition to the special ed co-ops and the curriculum groups, we can expect to see more of those being created, even between an elementary and high school in the same district, in order to have more flexibility in funding. So just continue. Thank you.
Just fund education.
And the rest of state government.
Exactly.
All the way around.
So our executive summary.
All right, Madam Chair, members of the board, on page 29 of your packet, I have a short write-up. We do have a couple of new employees here at TRS. Sherry Smith joined the TRS team as a member of our retired payroll team, and Jolene Genslinger joined TRS as a verifier and imaging technician. Sherry came to TRS with a lot of payroll and benefits experience, and Jolene was actually an employee of the Montana State Library and was part of the reduction in force over there. So just the timing of when we had that position open, it worked out that she was a big candidate for this position. Item number 2 is upcoming meetings. In November, both SAVA, which Isker is the staff member for the SAVA committee, and the Board of Investments are meeting on the same day of November 14th. The BOI meeting is November 14th and 15th, I believe. But I will be going to present the results of the evaluation that you adopted this morning to both of those committees, both SAVA and the Board of Investments, on November 14th. Statutorily, we're required to provide both those reports, and then I think the next LFC, Legislative Finance Committee meeting, will be sometime in December, so I'll have to also go report evaluation results to them in December. So those are the 2 meeting updates. I don't really have too much of it. Are there any questions about either the staff update or the upcoming meetings?
Another opportunity for public comment. Would you like to say anything about the SAVA meeting or anything?
No.
Thank you. All right, looking at our strategic planning, which is another discussion item. Worksheet update. We just looked at this and put it together. And
We did, Madam Chair, members of the board. I guess the one thing, so Jim Cairns had sent this out to all of you, basically summarized our strategic planning session from August. And within it, I worked with staff and we updated some of the timeline of when we believe we can get some of our objectives or outcomes completed by. So I'm not really looking for any kind of extended conversation about this. I just wanted to update the board as far as we have made these updates. If the board has any comment on any of the timeline changes we proposed, or even anything within the summary that Jim Cairns provided, we can certainly take that into consideration and ask for some changes or make modifications to this if necessary. I thought it was a productive session when we had in August, and I think it's reflected pretty well with the commitment worksheet we have now. And then going forward after this meeting, I will just provide a copy of the commitment worksheet itself with our progress towards those goals, for the upward if necessary, to achieve something or if we're not going to achieve. So
things do come up.
They do. So, is there any comment or discussion on any of that?
If edits are going to be made, we could change the spelling of my name on page 33.
Right on the very front. Yes. Yep, we can do that.
Another opportunity for public comment. I'm just going to keep asking because it's on there and I forget. So thanks for putting on and I appreciate getting that ahead of time to look through it.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll make that one change, and then there were some really small, I mean, they're not content-wise, small changes to the goals and objectives, that we'll make those updates. I think they're not really content changes as much as just clarification, so, all right.
Is the wording of goal 1 on page 40 cumbersome or awkward to anybody else? Should there just be a comma between constitution and state versus the and? Maintain an actuarially sound qualified retirement plan in compliance with Montana state constitution, comma, state and federal law, comma, and regulations governing such plans. It doesn't change the meaning, so.
To me personally, I think you could say it either way. So it would say state constitution, comma, remove the first and just go for the state and federal laws and regulations.
That would be incorrect.
I mean, it just seemed awkward to me, but
Yeah, the two ends are a little bit inappropriate language.
Or you could just use as well as instead of the first and.
as well as state, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Because it's kind of common.
right.
As well as state.
As well as state and federal. Yeah, I like I just didn't like that and there.
Okay. Make that change.
Sounds like a teacher.
Yeah. English.
That's right.
She's gonna give us line back there. Notice the science teacher didn't say anything. You just open capture.
All right, applications and benefit adjustments. Looks like we still have people retiring.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, members of the board, staff has been busy this summer. We processed over 500 application groups. You can see from the quarterly report, which is the bulk of our retirement season. We processed over, 600 folks. We're still averaging about the same, over 600 retirees a year. And the majority of them are in that May, June, July timeframe. So this report shows retirements. There are some that are retro back, but basically some retirements from April all the way through August. And it encompasses school districts, state agencies, universities, and as well as colleges, community college.
I like it. It's interesting to see their service,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
service.
It's all summarized on page 59, the total roll-up, but if each employer, like Tammy
Yeah.
mentioned, each employer is also set total if you're, interested.
47 years.
Wow.
See, Madeline Subaru just retired in September, I believe, September 1 in Anaconda. She had 65 years,
Yeah.
but really 67 years she taught, because the last 2 years she taught part-time, so 65 some years of service credit.
I can't even
And I did some, the research I could do,
Yeah.
looking at everything we have, and by far the longest in our history.
Yeah.
And her benefit probably,
It's more than, it's
Yeah.
Only 20 years.
What else?
Yeah.
yeah,
Social Security retirement.
Yeah.
yeah. I just love that.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. She probably still being a little kid.
I need to touch back on that.
2 pages.
What's that?
Oh, I was just asking her what SCDI was.
School district.
Yep, school
School
district.
district.
Yeah, those are just teachers versus like
Oh.
community college.
University.
I was thinking this is an awfully big school. Look at all
And
that.
then the STAG is state agencies. So,
Back here, you've got the university retirees.
I can't wait until I'm a board member that's not the last one to know something.
Okay. It is a big report, and thank you for all that work.
oh, you bet.
It has to be nice to have one other body.
Yes,
Yes, yeah.
definitely. I mean, really over the last few years, we've had 2 positions to that benefit officer team, where our benefit active member, which they're definitely all needed.
So what's the turnaround time from when someone files their paperwork and they get it